Cuba begins mass vaccination with its homegrown vaccines. Cuba is out ahead of us. This island that has seen itself cut off from a large part of the world is now out ahead of many other parts in the world, many other parts that may have been more advanced than them, and they're currently seeking to vaccinate their population with their own vaccines that they created. Cuba has begun a mass vaccination campaign centered around their 5 domestically produced vaccines. Yes, 5, some of which are still in development in an effort to inoculate the island's 11 million residents. Yes, they have produced 5 vaccines locally there. PAHO, the Pan American Health Organization, the video I did yesterday had their head speaking about the direction that she sees the region needs to go in order to allow us to be successful for this pandemic, and especially in light of the fact that many health professionals are saying that they foresee other like pandemics coming in the not too distant future. She was saying that our hopes lie in increasing our self-reliance and our self-sustainability in the areas of medical equipment, medical materials, and vaccines. Us producing these things ourselves is one way that we can assure that the rest of the world isn't abusing us and isn't treating us less than in considering us for vaccines. And currently, even in the COVAX facility that was set up just for the purpose of not treating the poorer countries, not treating the smaller countries less than, and allowing for more equitable distribution of these vaccines. The COVAX facility itself now is under some strain, with Canada having 5 times the number of vaccines that they need to inoculate their entire population, to vaccinate their entire population, and they're still tapping into COVAX and taking some out of it because they say they're entitled to such. The country began its vaccination campaign on Wednesday, earlier than its planned June rollout, choosing not to wait for formal vaccine authorization from the health ministry to try to curb a surge in COVID-19 cases. Using the vaccine before full authorization isn't really a surprising thing, especially if it's a vaccine developed in the country and being used by the same country. China did the same thing with their Sinopharm vaccines. Russia did likewise with their Sputnik vaccines, choosing to get a head start on their inoculation and their vaccination processes before the full authorization was given. Now, especially in the case of Cuba, they're currently having a surge in cases, so the vaccination drive has even greater importance and greater urgency. Vaccination is the method that many health professionals keep saying is our main route, our easiest route out of this pandemic. We vaccinate, we reach to herd immunity, and herd immunity would help to protect the entire country. And if enough nations can reach to herd immunity, maybe, hopefully, the entire world as one global herd, as it were, may be able to have herd immunity also. Over in Jamaica, we have some doctors saying that they're backing ivermectin in the COVID-19 fight. A group of doctors have renewed their call for the use of the parasitic drug ivermectin in the fight against COVID-19 in Jamaica. The group has written an open letter to Health and Wellness Minister Dr. Christopher Tufton and his technocrats, urging them to allow doctors at their discretion to consider introducing the drug as a coronavirus treatment. Tufton has repeatedly stated that Jamaica would not approve the drug in this regard because the government believes that its safety and efficacy for treating COVID-19 needs better research. But the doctors disagree with this stance, arguing that new studies have shown that ivermectin is an effective tool at the early stage of diagnosis. It is widely agreed that there is enough evidence to support the use of ivermectin in the treatment of COVID-19 at the discretion of doctors and with the agreement of their patients, they argued. We need not await WHO approval of the use of ivermectin for the treatment of COVID-19. The WHO, unfortunately, has been slow and sometimes incorrect in its assessment and advice on various aspects of the pandemic, and specifically so in relation to its current stance on ivermectin. The WHO's current stance on ivermectin is just about mirroring the same thing as the Jamaican government stance. Well, it's probably vice versa, with the Jamaican government mirroring the stance of the WHO, because that's what many governments do. Many governments take the default stance that they would follow the WHO. And the WHO's current stance, the current evidence on the use of ivermectin to treat COVID-19 patients is inconclusive. Until more data is available, WHO recommends that the drug only be used within clinical trials. But the Jamaican doctors aren't wrong. The WHO has indeed been slow on some of their recommendations and changing the guidelines as new evidence comes about. And this is understood because the WHO is a large bureaucratic body. Large machines, large bureaucratic machines like the WHO by nature run slow. Because when you have so many people within an organization, and that's one of the reasons that governments and large bureaucratic bodies almost inevitably lead to way more inefficiency. Because what you have is all this large number of people that are attempting at least to have one voice when they speak outside. So what needs to happen is they need to be sure upon show upon show. And then on top of that, when you add to the fact that the WHO depends on subventions and payments from other countries, they would have other considerations in mind, because the statement "who pays the piper calls the tune" remains for the most part true. With ivermectin though, it's critical to note that the creator of ivermectin, the Merck and Company which manufactures ivermectin, noted its analysis of the drug in studies identified no scientific basis for a potential therapeutic effect against COVID-19 and no meaningful evidence for clinical activity or clinical efficacy in patients with COVID-19. It's worth bearing in mind though that as the company that creates this drug, they would be trying to decrease the possibility of liability and the possibility that they have exposure on this specific drug. They do not want it to be that someone is using ivermectin, their drug, for this purpose that it isn't carded for. And if something happens to this person can then turn around and sue them for it. So them saying this isn't necessarily an indictment against the drug that is unable to be used. Because it is being used currently in Slovakia, they are using it. In South Africa, they're reluctantly using it. Interest in the drug is particularly high in Slovakia, where the government has authorized its use in COVID-19 patients. And in South Africa, where a pack of 10 pills can be found on the black market at prices that are 15 times higher than the standard $4, despite local health authorities warning against its use. And that again is the problem. The problem that we're facing everywhere. People do not believe the health authorities. They're seeking to find their own experts to tell them what they want to hear. So when we say listen to the science and listen to the experts, the question then arises, which science? Which scientists? Which experts? Because those things aren't a homogeneous block. All scientists, all evidence, all experts don't all say the same thing. They do not agree. And what if what they disagree on is across a massive spectrum? What they disagree on isn't just two shades of the same color, but two way opposite different things. Then what is the population going to do when we can have some people that can legitimately say what we're following is from something that this expert said? Look, these groups of doctors said this and we're following what they said. And you're saying, no, you don't believe those doctors, believe these doctors. That's a hard thing to really get someone into. The evidence that some people are pointing to with the ivermectin, because there is some evidence with it, although the WHO doesn't find this evidence conclusive, so many countries are again following as the WHO leads and not taking too strongly to the ivermectin. There is some evidence. In March 2020, a lab study performed by Australian scientists indicated that ivermectin inhibited the coronavirus. The study concluded that the use of the drug warrants further investigation for possible benefits in humans. And you see, when you're looking at this study, it is possible to stop right there and you get the answer you want and yay for ivermectin, and now we can demand that more interest be put into ivermectin. And maybe more interest should be put into it, and maybe it may be an alternative to allow the treatment of the symptoms and allowing quicker recovery and some more options in treatment with our medical staff. But there was more to the study. While this piqued interest in the drug, scientists noted the dosage required to achieve an antiviral effect is not only nearly 100 times higher than what has been approved for human use, but also potentially toxic. So there has been some evidence that this drug may have potential use, but there's also some evidence that the dosage required is a little iffy and may not be too safe for human use. So clearly some more studies need to be done into this, but I understand the clamor for it, because if we're saying this is an emergency, then maybe we should, in emergency, just as there may be emergency use approval for some of the vaccines, there may be some emergency use approval for some of these other treatments. That's a possibility. I don't know. But over in Trinidad, we're not having those arguments. We're not having the arguments about vaccines because, well, I think we received the Sinopharm vaccines and we're having a new vaccine rollout going on. And there's no real talk about ivermectin. I wouldn't be surprised though if I see Hopefully not the opposition, because chances are what may happen if the opposition picks up this argument is they're going to skew it and attempt to paint it in a color that is going to allow them to gain some political points from it, and very likely they're going to stumble it and cause the entire discussion on it to be thrown upside down, and we get no real value from it. So hopefully, if the ivermectin discussion is brought up in our country, it be brought up in a sane way where we can actually have a sane discussion on it and see what the possibility of it is. The focus of our health ministry right now, at least of our health minister, was on the sale of rapid tests, the antigen rapid tests. The health ministry is probing pharmacies selling COVID-19 antigen rapid tests and will bring the necessary charges to bear. The Elsing said the penalty for such sales is a fine of several $100,000 plus 6 months in jail. We're taking this very seriously, he said. Clearly they are. That's a steep fine for selling some tests. And I wondered what about these tests made them so bad. And I looked to see if there's some evidence to show that these tests warranted such a significant action and such a serious deterrent away from selling them. Well, luckily for us, the tests were reviewed. They were reviewed by none other than the MIT Technology Review. And as far as credibility goes, I think they would be kind of at the top of the list there. We reviewed 3 at-home COVID tests. The results were mixed. Over-the-counter home tests for COVID are finally here. MIT Technology Review obtained kits sold by 3 companies and tried them out. So what were the issues with these tests as seen by these reviewers of them? There were accuracy issues. The first problem is the accuracy. These tests have an accuracy varying generally between 85 and 95%, which means that 1 in every 10 people would be having a false negative. Meaning they're going to have a test, they're going to do one of these tests, they may in fact be infected, but the test tells them they aren't infected. So they would have a false negative on this test. And that's not a good thing. But then we think in the contrary, if there were no tests, this person very likely would not have been tested. So they still would not have known if they were positive or not. So the test, whether we have the test or we don't have the test, doesn't really change that fact and doesn't have an impact on the false negatives. It's only going to help show us some positives. Well, that's where the next problem is. And this problem may in fact be a bigger problem because the test also gives false positives. At a much smaller rate, the rate of accuracy on the reverse is 98%, so only in 2% of the cases you may have a false positive. 2% is not much, that's a small number. But here's the follow-up to that problem. This is a home test kit. What happens with home test kits? How do people use home test kits? Think about nearly any other home test kit for nearly any other condition or any other disease or any other human eventuality such as pregnancy. And think about how people do these tests. How often people only do one test. Granted that these COVID home tests may be more expensive, but the chances are still high that some people would do multiple tests. And when you do multiple tests, what happens to that 2% probability is that rises. Each time you do the test consecutively, the chances that you now see a positive result when you don't actually have a positive result increases. So now expand that over an entire nation. And what are the results that are going to happen? We're going to very likely have many more false positive tests than we actually have positive cases. And I think therein may lie the problem with the quick rapid tests being sold over the counter. They may cause a large skewing of our numbers at a national level. If that happens at a national level, how we treat with this disease would be skewed because the numbers that we have would not be representing the reality of the data. And having an accurate understanding of reality is key in understanding how to form solutions. That is probably one of the first parts of it. When you're trying to find solution, the first part of it is understanding exactly where the problem is. If you're trying to get out of a situation, you need to understand where you are first. Do you agree? Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.
And you feel the music rising with the time.